Kael pressed himself against the rough wall of the abandoned pipeline, pulling his shoulders in an attempt to find some warmth. Above him loomed the underground megalopolis of Veridia, a labyrinth of glowing tiers and floating power platforms that only magnified his terrestrial suffering. The bitter, dust-infused wind scoured the narrow service tunnel, carrying nothing but the smell of machine oil and the unfamiliar synthetic nutrients he couldn't afford. "Another glorious night in paradise," he muttered, watching his breath form clouds in the freezing air. At 19, Kael had been surviving in the rusty veins Veridia's lower, derelict sectors for 4 years, ever since the refugee transport that brought him here was abruptly diverted, leaving him alone. Human refugees were not particularly welcome in this sector, especially after the Ethereal Lands conflict, which had soured relations with most organic species. The temperature was dropping fast. Kael reached for the only prized possession he owned, a Thermaweave Hood. It was a specialized cloak he had found in the old mines. It not only retained heat, but also filtered the air, a vital function in these toxic tunnels. On nights like this, it was the difference between life and death. He was about to wrap himself in it when he heard a sound. A ragged, gasping inhale that wasn't his own. Kael froze, survival instincts screaming at him to run or hide. Instead, he peered deeper into the shadows. A figure lay huddled against the opposite wall, partially concealed behind a waste disposal unit. Even in the faint light, Kael could make out the distinctive, bright orange bark-like skin and the glowing, moss-like inlays of combat armor. "A Xylosian guardsman," Kael whispered. Damn it, the Xylosians were the dominant species in Veridia, tall, tree-like humanoids with orange bark and a culture based on energetic harmony. They were not known for their kindness towards Terrans. Every instinct commanded him to leave. It wasn't his problem. The soldier must have been drunk or overloaded on stims. But as Kael turned to leave, the Xylosian made another sound. Not the groan of an inebriate, but the desperate rasp of a person fighting for life. "You got to be kidding me," Kael muttered, crawling closer. The Xylosian was massive. His beautiful, almost carved features were contorted with pain. Life sap, thicker and darker than human blood, oozed from a wound in his side where his armor had been breached. Next to him lay a sophisticated energy rifle. "That looks like a power core shut down." "Hey," Kael said quietly, maintaining his distance. "Are you alive over there, Orange?" The Xylosian's eyes, a startling green against his orange bark, snapped open. He tried to speak, but could only manage a wet cough. "Don't try to talk," Kael said, moving closer. "You're in really bad shape." The Xylosian's gaze focused on him, widening slightly at the sight of a human. His hand twitched toward his weapon. "I'm not going to hurt you," Kael said quickly, raising his hands. "Not that I could, even if I wanted to. You guys are made of rock." The alien relaxed slightly, his green eyes clouding again with pain. Kael glanced around nervously. "Look, I should go find help. There's a Xylosian guard post 6 blocks from here." The soldier's hand shot out with surprising strength, gripping Kael's wrist. He shook his head, then winced at the exertion. "No guard." "Okay, got it. Been there myself." Kael hesitated. "But you need help, man. You're bleeding out." The Xylosian released him and weakly fumbled for a compartment in his armor. He retrieved a small device and pressed it before his hand fell limply to his side. "Signal for friends." "Smart," Kael said, noticing the alien's orange skin starting to take on a gray pallor. "But they better hurry." The wind howled through the tunnel, and the Xylosian shivered violently. Without thinking, Kael unfurled his Thermaweave Hood and carefully draped it over the wounded alien. "Here, this will keep you warm until your buddies show up." He tucked the edges around the soldier's massive frame. "It's not much, but it's the best cover in these slums. I found it when I was a kid. You know, these things hold energy well." The Xylosian's green eyes stared into his own gray-blue ones, a question in their depths. Kael shrugged. "Don't read too much into it, Orange. Just paying it forward. Someone helped me when I was first dumped out here." He settled down next to the alien, wrapping his arms around his knees. "I'll stay until your friends arrive. All sorts of scavengers come out in these tunnels after midnight." The Xylosian's eyes closed, his breathing shallow but steady. Kael sat, shivering, as the temperature continued to drop. Eventually, exhaustion overtook him, and he drifted into a fitful sleep, his back against the cold wall, dreaming of clean air, warmth, and the times before Veridia. He failed to notice the small scout drone that silently hovered above them, recording everything. Kael jolted awake to the unmistakable pressure of a weapon pressed against his temple. His eyes flew open to find himself surrounded by tall, orange figures in combat armor, identical to the one worn by the wounded soldier. Their faces were set hard as stone. "Do not move, human," a low voice snarled. The translator implanted in all refugees crackled in Kael's ear, converting the Xylosian language to English. "I didn't hurt him," Kael said quickly, raising his hands. "I was trying to help." There were at least 20 Xylosian Zenith warriors surrounding him, weapons pointed. Behind them, Kael saw more soldiers securing the tunnel perimeter. The wounded Xylosian was being tended to by what appeared to be medics. His vitals were displayed on hovering holographic screens. "Field Marshal Raxon has a core wound consistent with Chrono-Specter detonators," one of the medics said. "No human DNA detected at the entry point." The weapon at Kael's temple didn't budge. "Then why was this street rat found with our field marshal?" "Because this street rat gave him a blanket instead of robbing him blind." Kael snapped, his fear giving way to annoyance. "You're welcome, by the way." The Xylosian soldiers exchanged glances. One, clearly of higher rank, judging by the extra markings on his armor, stepped forward. "The human speaks the truth," a weak voice cut in. All heads turned to the wounded soldier, Field Marshal Raxon, who was now conscious and attempting to sit up despite the medic's protests. He rendered aid when he was under no obligation to do so. The Field Marshal's eyes, green as jade, found Kael's. "He gave me his only defense against the cold, human clothing of considerable personal value." The weapon at Kael's temple finally lowered. The high-ranking officer approached, studying Kael with narrowed eyes. "I am Seneschal Dreven, second in command of the Xylosian Expeditionary Corps. We are grateful for your aid to Field Marshal Raxon." Kael cautiously nodded. He looked like he needed help. Anyone would have done the same. "No," Raxon said, his voice stronger now as the medics finished his treatment. "They would not, especially a human aiding a Xylosian in this sector." Seneschal Dreven's expression remained stern. The field marshal was on a clandestine mission when he was ambushed by Chrono-Specter assassins. "We have been searching for him all night." Chrono-Specters," Kael frowned. "I thought they kept to the outer, toxic levels." "They're supposed to," Dreven replied grimly. "Their presence here is alarming." Field Marshal Raxon was now on his feet, though still unsteady. He walked over to Kael, still holding the Thermaweave Hood. "Your name?" "Human." "Kael." "Just Kael." Raxon nodded. "You have done me a great service, Kael. I will not forget it." He attempted to hand the hood back, but Kael noticed the alien's hand still trembled slightly from the loss of life sap. "Keep until you're better," Kael said. "It's cold down here." Raxon's green eyes widened slightly. "You continue to show mercy despite having nothing." Before Kael could reply, the ground beneath them vibrated. The soldiers stiffened, and Seneschal Dreven touched his communicator. "Main force has arrived," he announced. Kael felt his stomach clench. "Main force." In response, the narrow strip of sky visible above the tunnel darkened as massive troop transports took position. The walls of the surrounding structures shook as dropships began descending throughout the district. "What in the hell is going on?" Kael asked, barely audible over the roaring. "The Xylosian Expeditionary Corps is establishing a forward base in this sector," Dreven explained. "Field Marshal Raxon's mission was to scout the area ahead of our arrival." "All this for a base?" Kael asked skeptically. Raxon and Dreven exchanged a look. "The situation is more complex than it appears," Raxon said carefully. "The Chrono-Specters have been infiltrating this region for months. Their presence here suggests they're planning something significant. And I just stumbled into the middle of an interstellar conflict." Kael sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. "Well, it's been fun, but but I should probably leave before it gets any more fun. No, Raxon said firmly. You will come with us. Kael tensed. I'm not a prisoner. Not a prisoner, Raxon agreed. A guest. You saved my life, Kael. By our customs, that creates a debt that must be honored. I don't need. You are homeless, are you not? Raxon interrupted. You have no family here. Kael fell silent, unable to deny it. Then accept my hospitality, Raxon continued. At least until I can properly repay my debt to you. Seneschal Drevin looked less than pleased, but remained silent. Kael hesitated. The tunnels were all he had known for years, but they were cold, dangerous, and lonely. And if a war was brewing between the Xylosians and the Specters, the lower city would become even more perilous. Fine, he finally said, but only until you're fully recovered. Then we're even. The corners of Raxon's mouth curved into a semblance of a smile. We shall see. As they led him toward the waiting transport, Kael caught his reflection in a shattered window, his haggard face, ragged clothes, and tired eyes. He looked exactly like what he was, a survivor who had learned to expect the worst. But for the first time in years, he allowed himself to wonder if something better might be possible. The Xylosian transport glided silently through the upper tiers of Veridia, high above the grime and despair of the streets Kael had called home. Through the viewports, he watched the floating gardens and glittering spires, a world he had only ever seen from below, like stars too far away to touch. First time in the upper city? Seneschal Drevin asked, noticing Kael's wide eyes. Yeah, humans aren't exactly invited up here for dinner parties. Field Marshal Raxon, now sitting upright though still pale, studied Kael with interest. You speak our language well. All refugees get translator implants, Kael explained, tapping behind his ear. Standard procedure. Doesn't mean anyone talks to us, though. The transport docked at a massive structure suspended between three towering spires. Kael had seen it from below. The locals called it the Tri-Heart Spire, the center of Xylosian military operations in the sector. Welcome to Command Center, Raxon said as they disembarked. Xylosian soldiers snapped to attention as the field marshal passed, their gazes lingering curiously on the disheveled human among them. Kael nervously ran a hand through his matted hair, acutely aware of the ingrained dirt on his skin and clothes. For years on the streets left its mark. You will be given chambers and fresh clothing, Raxon said, as if reading his mind. My personal aide will see to your needs. An elderly Xylosian with silver streaking his orange bark appeared, bowing slightly. Field Marshal, the medical team insists you report to the infirmary immediately. After I have properly settled our guest, Raxon replied firmly. Sir, with all due respect, High Command requires a report on the Spectre presence, and your daughter has been quite worried. A melodic voice interjected from behind them. Kael turned to see a slender Xylosian woman. Her bark was a lighter shade, almost peach, and her silvery white fibers were gathered in an intricate braid. Unlike the soldier's utilitarian armor, she wore flowing robes that shimmered with every movement. Lumera, Raxon's stern face softened. I told you to remain in our quarters. And I told you I am not a child to be sheltered, she countered, embracing her father carefully, mindful of his injuries. Her eyes, the same striking green as Raxon's, flicked to Kael, narrowing slightly. Who is this? This is Kael, Raxon said. He saved my life last night. Lumera's expression shifted from suspicion to astonishment. A human? Yes, a human, Kael said, meeting her gaze. We sometimes do things besides take up space in your slums. Her eyes widened at his directness. Seneschal Drevin made a sound of disapproval, but Raxon looked simply amused. Lumera, please escort our guest to the guest chambers while I attend to my duties, Raxon said. Ensure he has everything he requires. It would be an honor, Raxon added in a tone that brooked no argument. Lumera's posture stiffened, but she nodded. Of course, father. Once Raxon and his officers had departed, Kael was left alone with the field marshal's daughter, who stared at him with ill-concealed disdain. This way, she said curtly, turning on her heel. Kael followed her through the glittering corridors, attracting curious, and sometimes hostile glances from passing Xylosians. Lamera walked quickly, as if trying to increase the distance between them. "So," Kael said, lengthening his stride to keep up. "Not a fan of humans, are we?" "I have no opinion of humans in general," she replied without looking at him. "Just me specifically, then." "Good to know." That earned him a side glance. "My father is the most important military commander in this sector. He was nearly killed last night." "Yes, I was there. Yet you, a street dweller, just happened to find him." Kael stopped. "You think I had something to do with the attack?" Lamera stopped, turned to face him. "I think it is a remarkable coincidence." "Life is full of them," Kael said, shrugging. "Yesterday, I was dumpster diving for dinner. Today, I'm getting side-eye from an alien princess. I didn't plan either one." Something flickered in her green eyes. Surprise, perhaps, at his bluntness. "I'm not a princess. You could have fooled me with that attitude." For a moment, she looked like she might snap at him, but instead, her lips unexpectedly curved slightly. "You are either very brave or very foolish to speak to me that way." "Probably both," Kael admitted. "Street survival tip. Sometimes the best defense is a good offense." She studied him for another second, then continued walking. "The guest chambers are here." The chambers were larger than any place Kael had ever lived, with a panoramic view of the city below. A cleaning drone hovered near the entrance. "The sanitation unit is in there," Lamera said, pointing to a door. "The drone will take your clothing for purification and repair. And what am I supposed to wear in the meantime? Appropriate attire will be provided." She moved to leave, but hesitated. "My father wishes you to join us for the evening repast in 2 cycles. Dinner with the Field Marshal." "Huh? Should I bring anything? A bottle of wine? Some plasma grenades?" That almost made her smile. "Just yourself, preferably clean." After she left, Kael stood in the middle of the lavish room, feeling more out of place than he ever had on the streets. But when he caught his reflection in a polished surface, haggard, dirty, defiant, he straightened. Dinner with the Field Marshal and his Ice Princess daughter, he muttered to himself. What could possibly go wrong? Kael stared at his reflection in the polished mirror, barely recognizing himself. The sanitation unit, a far cry from the public wash racks he occasionally broke into, had scrubbed off years of grime in minutes. His dark hair, now clean and trimmed by an automated grooming system, fell in soft waves instead of matted tangles. His skin, freed from layers of dirt, looked almost luminous in the ambient lighting. Not bad for a street rat, he muttered, squaring his shoulders. A soft chime announced the arrival of his escort. Taking a deep breath, Kael stepped out to find a Xylosian guardsman waiting for him. "The Field Marshal awaits your presence," the guardsman said formally, showing no emotion at the sight of a human in Xylosian-style clothing. They walked through corridors filled with military personnel, all of whom stopped to salute as they passed. Kael realized with some surprise that the salute wasn't for him, but for the markings on his escort's uniform. He was being accompanied by a member of Raxon's personal guard. The dining hall was intimate by Xylosian standards, though grand enough to make Kael's palms sweat. Field Marshal Raxon sat at the head of a semicircular table, looking significantly better than before. His wounds were treated, and he was dressed in a formal uniform adorned with medals and insignia Kael couldn't begin to decipher. Lamera sat to her father's right, her silvery white fibers now cascading freely over her shoulders, exposed by an elegant gown that matched the color of her bark. She looked up as Kael entered, her green eyes widening slightly. "Ah, Kael." Raxon rose, gesturing him to the empty seat on his left. "You look refreshed." "Amazing what soap and real clothes can do," Kael replied, trying to hide his nervousness with humor. Also present were Seneschal Drevin and 3 other high-ranking officers Kael didn't recognize. Their expressions ranged from curiosity to barely concealed disdain. "Allow me to introduce General Kron, Admiral Sfera, and Major Venera," Raxon said, pointing to each officer in turn. "Gentlemen and madam, this is Kael, the human who rendered me aid last night." The officers gave stiff nods. Kael took his seat, immediately confronted with a set of cutlery that looked like they might be surgical instruments. We were just discussing the Spectre incursion, Drevin said. Their presence in this sector violates 3 separate treaties. Politics bore me, Lamera interjected, her voice cool. Perhaps we could discuss something our guest might actually understand. Kael picked up what he hoped was a drinking chalice. Don't mind me. I love a good treaty violation discussion with dinner. Admiral Sphera snorted. What could a human know of interstellar politics? About as much as I know about the proper use of siphon, Kael admitted, purposely selecting the wrong utensil as servants began to bring in intricate dishes. He took a bite of the still wiggling food and instantly regretted it. He forced himself to swallow. Delicious. Lumera's lips twitched. That is a palate cleanser, not a food course. You are meant to let it dissolve on the tongue. Heat rushed to Kael's face. Right, I knew that. I understand humans have a concept called charity, Admiral Sphera said, his tone suggesting he found the idea repulsive. Did you aid Field Marshal Raxon for some spiritual reward? Kael paused. No, I helped him because he needed help. Simple as that. Nothing is ever that simple, Drevin countered. Some things are, Kael insisted. Someone needs help. You help them. Doesn't matter if they're human, Xylosian, or whatever this thing is on my plate. An awkward silence fell over the table. In our Xylosian culture, Lamera finally spoke, her voice softer. Aid creates an obligation. There's always the expectation of return. Sounds exhausting, Kael said. Always tracking who owes who what. It maintains order, General Kron stated firmly. Maybe, Kael conceded, but it also means you might hesitate to help someone if you're not ready for the obligation. What if Field Marshal Raxon had bled out while someone was calculating if his rescue was worth the debt? The officers exchanged glances, clearly unsettled by his directness. An interesting perspective, Raxon said thoughtfully. Perhaps there is wisdom in the human approach. Lamera was studying Kael with new intensity. You truly expected nothing in return for assisting my father? Well, I definitely didn't expect to be having dinner with Veridia's military elite, Kael said with a smirk. I would have at least practiced with the silverware. An unexpected laugh rippled around the table, breaking the tension. Even Drevin's stern expression eased slightly. As the meal progressed, Kael made several more social faux pas. Drinking from a ceremonial cup, accidentally activating the food synthesizer with his elbow, and nearly causing a diplomatic incident by praising the cook, apparently a grave insult in Xylosian culture. Yet, with each mistake, the atmosphere grew lighter. By dessert, even Admiral Sphera was explaining Xylosian customs with something approaching patience. You are the first human I have met who asks questions instead of making assumptions, the Admiral reluctantly admitted. Street survival tip number 2, Kael replied. When you're the outsider, learn the rules fast or get crushed. As the repast concluded, Kael noticed Lamera watching him. Her earlier disdain had been replaced by something he couldn't quite define. When their eyes met, she didn't look away. Perhaps, Field Marshal Raxon said, rising from his seat. Lamera might show you our vibration observatory. It offers the best view of Veridia. I'd like that, Kael said, surprising himself with his sincerity. Lamera rose gracefully. As would I, father. As they exited the dining hall, Kael caught Raxon's eye, who looked at them with an expression that seemed almost calculating. The vibration observatory occupied the entire topmost tier of the central spire of the Tri-Heart Spire. When the lift doors parted, Kael gasped. The massive dome above was perfectly transparent, revealing Veridia's energy grid and the heavens above in all their glory. Stars, distant planets, and ethereal ribbons of nebulae painted the darkness. This is incredible, he whispered. Lumera's expression softened at his genuine awe. The dome can project any celestial view from our database. This is Veridia's actual sky, but I could show you Earth's constellations if you prefer. No, this is perfect, Kael said, stepping further into the hall. The observatory was filled with flora from dozens of worlds, arranged in spiraling patterns that created natural pathways through the lush growth. A soft bioluminescent glow emanated from the flowers and fungi, casting a fairy tale radiance over everything. It's more than just a garden, Lamera explained, leading him deeper into the greenery. Each section contains a complete ecosystem from a different world. And this, she gestured toward a wall of monitors partially obscured by hanging vines, is our surveillance center. Kael raised an eyebrow. Hiding your spy gear in a garden. That's actually pretty clever. The botanical specimens provide the perfect cover for our sensor array, she said with a hint of pride. We monitor the entire city from here. As they walked, Kael noticed a section segregated from the rest, contained within a thin energy field. The plants inside were unlike the exotic specimens throughout the observatory. They were simpler, more familiar. Are those? He walked closer, barely daring to believe his eyes. Terran flora, Lamera confirmed. After the ethereal lands conflict ravaged your outer colonies, we preserved the samples we could. Kael walked right up to the barrier, his fingers hovering just above the energy field. Inside, there were oak saplings, roses, and, his heart leaping, a cluster of small purple flowers with yellow centers. Violets, he said, his voice choked. My mother used to grow those. She said they reminded her of Earth, even though she'd never been there. Lamera studied him, her green eyes reflecting the bioluminescent light. Do you miss her? It wasn't a question, but Kael nodded anyway. She died when our refugee ship was attacked. I was supposed to meet her at the evacuation point, but I was delayed helping an old man who couldn't walk fast enough. By the time I got there, he swallowed hard. The ship was gone. I was told later it was destroyed by raiders. You helped a stranger and lost everything, Lamera said quietly. Yet you did the same for my father. Kael shrugged, feeling uncomfortable under her intense gaze. Like I said at dinner, someone needs help, you help them. Lamera was silent for a moment, then touched a control panel. The energy field flickered and parted. She reached in and carefully plucked one of the violets, offering it to him. My mother died in a Chrono-Specter attack, she said as Kael accepted the flower with trembling fingers. I was very young. They targeted a civilian research station where she studied interspecies medicine. No warning, no demands. They just wiped it out. I'm sorry, Kael said, meaning it. The Spectres believe in genetic purity above all else, she continued. Other species are either resources to exploit or contaminants to be eliminated. They especially despise humans for your genetic adaptability. Kael twirled the violet between his fingers. And Xylosians? How do we feel about you? Lamera's lips curved in a small smile. Until recently, I thought of humans as chaotic and unpredictable, dangerous in your own way. Now, she met his gaze. Now I don't know what to think. You're still unpredictable, but perhaps that isn't entirely a bad thing. A sudden alert from the surveillance console interrupted the moment. Lamera quickly moved to the monitors, her brow furrowing as she studied the displays. What is it? Kael asked, joining her. Anomalous energy signatures in the lower city, she said, her fingers dancing over the controls. And this is the 6th such occurrence in the last 2 days. Kael leaned closer, scrutinizing the readings. The screen showed various sectors of Veridia, focusing on a specific district in the lower levels, not far from where he had found Field Marshal Raxon. Wait, go back to that last channel, he said suddenly. Lamera complied, bringing up footage of a bustling market street. Kael pointed at a vendor stall. That shop wasn't there 3 days ago. I know because I tried to sleep in that alcove and got chased off. Perhaps it's new, Lamera suggested. In that spot? No way. That's prime lower-tier real estate. You don't open a shop overnight there. Unless what? Kael's mind raced, connecting dots from years of street observation. Pull up the locations of the other energy anomalies. The display shifted, showing 6 points scattered across the lower city. To most, they would seem random, but Kael recognized the pattern instantly. They are located on key infrastructure nodes, he said, pointing to each location. Water purification, power distribution, atmospheric regulators, and look, he pointed to the timestamps. They're appearing sequentially, moving inward toward the central district. Lamera's eyes widened. The Spectres aren't preparing an attack. They're already here, and they're setting up for something major. Kael agreed. Those aren't just energy spikes. They're test activations of what? I don't know, but nothing good puts down roots in 6 critical infrastructure points. Kael straightened. We need to tell your father. Lamera had already activated the communication system when the monitors suddenly sputtered. One by one, the surveillance channels began to drop offline. They're jamming our system, she said, her voice tight with alarm. We're being blinded. Through the transparent dome above, Kael saw a flash of light in the distance, then another closer to the Tri-Heart Spire. Those aren't system failures, he said grimly. The attack has already begun. The main lift was unresponsive. Emergency lights cast a pulsing crimson glow across the observatory as distant explosions rattled the Tri-Heart Spire superstructure. We need to get to Command Center, Lamera said, her military training evident in her calm efficiency as she accessed a hidden panel. Father will be coordinating the defense. I take it the express lift is out, Kael quipped, masking his own tension. There's a service shaft that runs parallel to the main lift system, she replied, revealing a narrow passageway behind the panel. It's restricted access, but let me guess. Field Marshal's daughter privileges. A shadow of a smile touched her lips. Something like that. They entered the shaft, which contained a series of rungs bolted to the wall. Lamera began to descend first, the flowing fabric of her gown suddenly impractical. Noticing Kael's hesitation above her, she glanced up. What is it? Nothing, he said quickly, looking away from the view afforded by her position. Just, calculating our best route. Her green eyes narrowed, understanding. Calculating, indeed. They descended in silence for several minutes, the distant sounds of chaos growing louder. Suddenly, the entire shaft vibrated violently. Kael lost his grip, sliding down several rungs before catching himself. Are you all right? He yelled down. Yes, Lamera replied, her voice strained. But we need to get out soon. This shaft runs too close to the outer hull. If the Tri-Heart Spire's structural integrity is compromised, say no more, Kael cut in. I've had enough falls to last a lifetime. They reached an access hatch 10 levels down. Lamera input a security code, but the panel remained red. Systems are down, she muttered. We'll have to bypass manually. Let me, Kael said, examining the panel. Locks are my specialty on the streets. He peeled open the control casing and studied the wiring for a moment before deftly reconnecting a few junctions. The hatch opened with a reluctant groan. Impressive, Lamera admitted as they scrambled through. Don't look so surprised. Humans are good for more than just charity. They emerged into a corridor filled with smoke and flashing emergency lights. Debris littered the floor. Distant weapon fire echoed throughout the structure. Command Center is 3 levels below, Lamera said, getting her bearings. This way. They moved cautiously through the corridor, Lamera guiding them with the confidence of someone who had grown up in these halls. At an intersection, she suddenly flattened herself against the wall, pulling Kael back with her, her body pressed close to his, warm and tense. Chrono-Specter infiltrators, she whispered, her breath tickling his ear. Kael carefully peered around the corner. 2 figures in sleek, predatory armor were accessing a security terminal. Unlike the orange Xylosians, the Spectres had metallic, gray skin and elongated skulls that gave them a distinctly reptilian appearance. How did they get in? He whispered back. They must have had agents in place before the attack, she replied. We need to find another route. Kael scanned the surroundings, spotting a service panel overhead. Vents. Lamera looked skeptical. Those shafts are barely big enough for maintenance drones. Good thing I'm skinny from years of malnutrition, Kael said with a grim smile. Boost me. With surprising strength, Lamera helped him up to the ceiling panel. He slid it open and pulled himself into the narrow shaft, then reached down to help her follow. The passage was cramped, forcing them to crawl on their bellies through the dusty air duct. Not exactly how I pictured ending up in a confined space with you, Kael muttered. Focus, Kael, she replied, but he heard the smile in her voice. They navigated the ventilation system, guided by Lumera's knowledge of the Tri-Heart Spire's layout. Through the grates, they saw scenes of chaos. Xylosian soldiers exchanging fire with Spectre infiltrators. Med teams tending to wounded civilians being evacuated to safe zones. The Spectres were more prepared than we thought, Lamera whispered. This isn't just an attack. It's a full-scale incursion. And those energy signatures we spotted, they must have been jamming devices targeting our defense systems. They reached a junction where the shaft widened enough for them to sit up. Lamera checked a small holographic map projected from her wrist. Command center should be directly below us, 2 levels down. A sudden blast shook the shaft, raining dust and debris on them. Kael instinctively pulled Lamera against him, covering her with his body as a section of the air duct collapsed behind them. When the dust settled, they were pressed together in the confined space, their faces inches apart. For a moment, the battle seemed distant, irrelevant. You didn't have to do that, Lamera said softly, her green eyes reflecting the emergency lights seeping through the grate beneath them. Street survival tip number 3, Kael replied, his voice husky. Protect what matters. Something shifted in her expression. Surprise, then a warmth he hadn't seen before. Her hand moved to his face, her fingers cool against his skin. Another explosion jolted them back to reality. The grate beneath them groaned and suddenly gave way, sending them tumbling into the room below in a tangle of limbs and dust. Kael landed hard, Lamera on top of him. As the dust cleared, he realized they were staring down the barrels of several plasma rifles. Hold your fire, a familiar voice roared. Field Marshal Raxon stood by the central tactical display, surrounded by his officers. The command center was a hive of activity, with displays showing battles raging across the Tri-Heart Spire and Veridia. Father, Lamera scrambled up, her composure instantly returning despite her disheveled state. What in the name of the 7 moons of Xylos were you two doing in the ventilation system? Raxon demanded, though there was relief in his eyes. Evading Spectre infiltrators, Kael said, wincing as he got to his feet. They're all over the upper tier. Seneschal Dreven approached, his uniform singed and torn. We've detected energy signatures throughout the city, but cannot determine their purpose. We know what they are, Lamera said quickly, explaining their discovery in the observatory. Infrastructure targets, Raxon mused, studying the tactical display. But why? Shutting down the city systems would also affect their own forces. Kael stepped forward, examining the display. Unless they plan on staying. Sir, I think those aren't just jamming devices. They're bombs. Absolutely not. Seneschal Dreven slammed his fist on the tactical display. We cannot entrust a critical mission to a human from the streets. Field Marshal Raxon studied the holographic map of Veridia, where 6 pulsing red dots marked the presumed bomb locations. 3 of our teams have already been ambushed. The Spectres control too many main thoroughfares. I know routes no one else knows, Kael insisted. Service tunnels, drainage systems, abandoned transit lines. Routes the Spectres won't be watching because most people don't even know they exist. Raxon's green eyes shifted to his daughter. Lamera. Kael's knowledge of the lower city may be our only advantage, she said firmly. I've seen his ability to navigate hostile territory. I trust him. The field marshal nodded slowly. Very well. Assemble a small team. You need to move fast and move silent. I will lead it, Lamera volunteered immediately. Absolutely not, Raxon and Dreven said in unison. With all due respect, Father, Lamera countered. I'm the only one who has worked with both our tactical systems and Kael. I can identify the devices and disarm them. A tense silence hung over the command center. Another explosion rocked the Tri-Heart Spire, making the decision more urgent. For cycles, Raxon finally said. You have 4 cycles before the Spectres can potentially activate those devices. Take Lieutenant Mail and Sergeant Krell. They are our best infiltration specialists. 30 minutes later, Kael found himself in the lower levels of the Tri-Heart Spire, fitted with light Xylosian combat gear modified for his human frame. Beside him, Lamera was checking specialized disruptor tools she would use to neutralize the bombs. Her formal gown was replaced by a sleek tactical suit that highlighted her slender, peach-brown physique. "Anything interesting?" she asked, catching his gaze. "Just admiring the Xylosian engineering," he replied with a half-smile. Lieutenant Mael, a stern-faced Xylosian with battle scars across his left cheek, cleared his throat disapprovingly. "We need to move out. The closest device is in Sector 17. That's deep in Spectre-controlled territory," Sergeant Kael, a stockier Xylosian whose bulk made Kael feel particularly small, observed. "We're not taking the main routes," Kael said, moving toward a maintenance hatch that even the Xylosian soldiers hadn't noticed. "We're going under them." The hatch led into a cramped service tunnel, smelling of mildew and industrial chemicals. As they descended deeper into Veridia's forgotten infrastructure, the sounds of the battle above faded. "How do you know these passages?" Lieutenant Mael asked suspiciously. "When you're homeless, you learn every nook where you can find shelter or safety," Kael explained, navigating the maze of tunnels with confidence. Most people never looked down. They briefly surfaced in a lower market district, now deserted as civilians fled the fighting. Kael guided them through a series of back alleys and hidden passages, avoiding Spectre patrols with unsettling accuracy. "The first target should be right ahead," Lamera whispered, checking her scanner. "The energy signature matches a high-yield fusion device." The location, a water purification substation, was guarded by 2 Spectre soldiers. Sergeant Kael silently neutralized them with stun charges, while Lieutenant Mael secured the perimeter. Inside, they found a sleek metallic device attached to the station's main control node, pulsing with ominous energy. "Can you disarm it?" Kael asked as Lamera examined the bomb. "Yes, but it will take time," she replied, pulling tools from her kit. "Keep watch." While the Xylosian soldiers monitored the approaches, Kael stayed with Lamera, handing her tools as needed, their fingers brushing with every exchange, sending an unexpected warmth through his body despite the tension of the situation. "Why did you volunteer?" he asked quietly. "Your father would have understood if you'd stayed in command center." Lamera's hands remained steady as she worked on the device. "Because you volunteered, and I wasn't about to let you face this alone. I've been alone most of my life," Kael said. "I'm used to it." She paused, green eyes meeting his. "Perhaps you don't have to be." A moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken feeling, until Lieutenant Mael's urgent whisper broke the spell. "Spectre patrol approaching. We need to move." "Done," Lamera announced, the bomb's lights fading as she disconnected the final component. "One down, 5 to go." They slipped away moments before the Spectre patrol entered the substation, plunging deeper into the lower city. The next 3 targets followed a similar pattern, Kael guiding them through hidden routes, the team neutralizing the guards, and Lamera disarming the devices with increasing efficiency. Between the 4th and 5th targets, they took shelter in an abandoned maintenance hub to rest briefly and check their tactical updates. The news was grim. Spectre forces had pushed deeper into Veridia, and the Tri-Heart Spire itself was under heavy bombardment. "We're running low on time," Lieutenant Mael said grimly. "The last 2 devices are in the most heavily patrolled sectors." "There's one more way," Kael said, studying the map. "But it's risky, and we'll have to go through the old sewage systems." "Sewage?" Sergeant Kael looked disgusted. "They were decommissioned years ago when Veridia upgraded its waste management," Kael explained. "Most sections are dry now, but they're unstable. No one goes down there, not even the most desperate, which makes them perfect." "Perfect," Lamera concluded. The entrance to the old sewer was hidden beneath an abandoned reclamation plant. The air was stale and heavy with decay. The darkness was near absolute save for their tactical lights. "Stick close," Kael warned. "These tunnels can shift without warning." They moved cautiously through the decaying infrastructure, the silence broken only by the distant dripping of water and their careful footsteps. In the confined space, Lamera stayed close to Kael, her presence both comforting and distracting. "How much further?" Lieutenant Mael asked, his voice echoing slightly. "Almost there," Kael replied. "The next device should be just." He was cut short by a violent tremor as the tunnel shook. A section of the ceiling collapsed behind them, cutting off their retreat. "Forward is our only option now," Lamera said. Her shoulder pressed against Kael's in the narrow passage. They pressed on, eventually reaching a junction that opened into a larger chamber. The fifth device was directly above them, according to their scanner. "We'll need to climb up to the upper tier," Lamera said, pointing to a service ladder. As they climbed, another tremor shook the structure. Kael lost his footing and slipped. But Lamera's hand shot out, grasping his wrist with surprising strength. Their eyes met in the dim light, her green gaze holding his with an intensity that transcended their perilous situation. When they reached the top, she didn't immediately let go. "Lamera," he began in a low voice. "Later," she promised, her fingers briefly caressing his cheek. "When this is over." The fifth device was disarmed without incident, leaving only one target, located at Veridia's central power distribution node. As they approached through the abandoned tunnels, Sergeant Krell's communicator crackled. "Team, this is Strike Command." Raxon's voice was distorted by static. "Spectre forces are converging on your position. They must know what you are doing." "We are nearly at the final target," Lamera reported. "ETA, 5 minutes. Be advised," Raxon continued. "We have detected an activation sequence countdown. All devices are linked. If one remains active, they will all detonate remotely." The team exchanged grim glances. Their mission had just become even more urgent. "We can do this," Kael vowed, leading them toward the final location. As they emerged from the tunnels near the power node, they found themselves in the middle of a firefight between Xylosian defenders and Spectre assault forces. Lieutenant Mail took a hit to the shoulder as Sergeant Krell moved to cover their advance. "Go!" Krell shouted. "We'll hold them." Kael and Lamera sprinted across the open space, plasma fire sizzling in the air around them. They reached the power node access door, which Kael quickly bypassed using his lock-breaking skills. Inside, they found the last device, larger than the others, and already in its activation sequence. A holographic countdown showed less than 3 minutes. "This is more complex," Lamera said immediately, getting to work. "They must have anticipated us neutralizing the others." Kael stood guard at the door, watching as Spectre forces began pushing back the Xylosians. "Whatever you're going to do it fast. I need more time," she said, her voice tight with frustration as her fingers flew over the device's components. "Then I'll buy you some," Kael replied, moving to barricade the entrance. While Lamera worked frantically to disarm the bomb, Kael braced himself for what might be their final fight, knowing that everything that happened next would change everything between them, if they survived. "I can't disarm it," Lamera said, her voice strained with frustration as the countdown ticked down to 2 minutes. "They integrated a quantum lock. If I try to force it, it will detonate immediately." Kael joined her at the device, studying its pulsing core and the intricate network of energy channels connecting it to the power node. "Wait," he said, an idea sparking in his mind. "It's hardwired into the power system, right?" "Yes, it's drawing power for the blast amplification." "Then what if we get it too much? Overload it before it can detonate." Lamera's green eyes widened. "That might work. A controlled surge could fry the detonator without triggering the explosive core. Can you access the power distribution controls?" She moved to the nearest terminal. "Yes, but I'll need to bypass security protocols, and the surge has to be precisely calibrated. Too little won't stop it. Too much might trigger the bomb." "Do it," Kael said, moving to reinforce the door as the sounds of battle drew closer. "I'll buy you time." The terminal responded to Lamera's commands, the display shifting as she bypassed security measures with practiced efficiency. "I need to reroute power from 3 substations to create enough of a surge." Kael glanced at the countdown. 90 seconds remaining. A blast hit the door, buckling the metal slightly. Spectre voices barked orders from the other side. "Almost ready," Lamera said, her fingers flying over the controls. "But I need to be at the device to manually connect the bypass when the surge happens." "That's suicide," Kael protested. "You'll be right next to it if something goes wrong." "There is no other way," she insisted. "Someone has to complete the circuit at the exact moment." Another explosion hit the door. It wouldn't hold much longer. "Then I'll do it," Kael said. "No, I know. Show me," he cut in. "Fast 60 seconds. Reluctantly, Lamera walked him through the process, showing him where to attach the bypass module she had prepared. "When the surge hits, you have a 3-second window to complete the connection," she explained. "Too early or too late, and boom. Got it." The door finally gave way, and Spectre soldiers poured inside. Lamera ducked behind the terminal as the room filled with plasma fire. "Now!" she cried, triggering the surge. 20 seconds. Kael felt the hair on his arms stand up as massive energy began flowing through the conduits. The bomb casing grew hot to the touch. 15 seconds. "Surge at maximum," Lamera cried. "Connect it now." Kael slammed the bypass module home, completing the circuit. Blinding energy shot through the device, the countdown display flickering wildly. 5 seconds. 4, 3. The display went blank. For one terrifying moment, nothing happened. Then the bomb core let out a piercing shriek before completely fizzling. Its energy harmlessly dissipated into the grid. The Spectre soldiers froze in shock. In that moment of hesitation, Xylosian reinforcements led by Sergeant Krell burst through another entrance, quickly overwhelming them. "You did it," Lamera gasped, rushing to Kael. "We did it," he corrected, wincing at the burn on his hand. Within hours, the tide of the battle turned. With the bombs neutralized and their element of surprise gone, Spectre forces began a hasty retreat for Veridia. The Xylosian military, rallied by Field Marshal Raxon, pushed them back on all fronts. 3 cycles later, Kael stood on a balcony at the Tri-Heart Spire, watching the city below begin its recovery. His hand was bandaged, but Xylosian medical tech ensured it would heal scarless. "Enjoying the view," Lumera's voice said from behind him. He turned to see her approaching, dressed more casually than he'd ever seen. Her silvery white hair hung loose over her shoulders. "Just thinking about how different it looks from up here," he said. "A week ago, I was down there scrounging for food." She joined him at the railing, her shoulder brushing his. "And now you are a hero of Veridia. Father says the Xylosian High Command is considering creating a special advisory position for you." "Me, advising military commanders?" Kael laughed. "I'm just a lucky street kid." "No," Lamera said firmly, turning to face him. "You are a human who gave his only protection to a stranger, who risked his life to save a city that never showed him kindness. That is not luck, Kael. That is who you are." The sincerity in her green eyes made his heart race. "What about us? Is there an us?" "My father has already given his blessing," she said with a small smile. "Apparently, saving his life and his city has earned you the right to court his daughter, despite your unconventional origins." "Court you?" Kael raised an eyebrow. "Is that the Xylosian custom?" "It is," she confirmed, "though I am willing to explore human customs as well." The invitation in her eyes was unmistakable. Kael pulled her closer, their bodies fitting together perfectly despite their different physiologies. "I think we can find a compromise," he murmured before claiming her lips with his kiss. That night, they discovered that despite their different worlds, some languages were universal. The language of touch, of whispers, of two bodies finding harmony in the dark. Their union was a bridge between species, passionate and tender, breaking down the last barriers between them. Later, as they lay embraced, Lamera traced the contours of his face in wonder. "In our Xylosian culture," she said softly, "there is a belief that souls can recognize each other across lifetimes, across species. We call it Kalendari, the reunion of souls. Is that what this is?" "I don't know," he confessed. "But I know that when you gave my father your hood that night, you set in motion something neither of us could have imagined." A cycle later, Field Marshal Raxon stood before the assembled Xylosian High Command and the newly formed Human Xylosian Diplomatic Council. Beside him stood Kael and Lamera, now officially recognized as bonded partners under both human and Xylosian law. "The Spectre threat has been neutralized," Raxon announced, "largely thanks to the actions of this young man." He turned to Kael, presenting him with the familiar gray Thermaweave hood, now restored and emblazoned with Xylosian symbols of honor. A simple act of kindness, Raxon continued. The passing of a blanket to a dying stranger forged an alliance that will strengthen both our peoples. As Kael accepted the hood, his mother's last gift, now a symbol of interspecies unity, he reflected on how far he had come from that cold tunnel. From a homeless boy with nothing to give but his hood to a bridge between worlds. Lumira's hand found his, her touch a promise of all that was yet to come. Sometimes the smallest acts of compassion can change the course of galaxies.